Welcome back to hour number 2 of the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Our next guest is a gentleman who, I must tell you, is one of my favorite guests anytime he comes on. Dr. Walter E. Williams serves on the faculty of George Mason University as a John M. Olin Distinguished Professor of Economics. He's the author of Race and Economics, How Much Can Be Blamed on Discrimination, and Up from the Projects, an autobiography. He's a columnist, he's a commentator, and sometimes sit-in host for Rush Limbaugh. And he's a special guest on our show. We're talking about Dr. Walter E. Williams, and we welcome him to the show this morning. Dr. Williams, always a pleasure, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. I was reading, we were just talking a moment ago, and I posed a question to some callers and listeners. What is the difference between President Obama and the new Congress coming in? I know we haven't had a chance to see the new Republican Congress, and yet we've had a chance to see the old Congress and a lot of Republicans in it. And one of the points that I made was, you have to, in a very, from my standpoint, a very perverted sense, respect President Obama as a man who has the convictions of his beliefs. He is a guy who is pushing forward with the convictions of his belief. And then I read a piece that you wrote back on November 19th of this year called Obama versus Us. And I think you get to the same point right there.
Oh, I think that all politicians pursue their own interests, and perhaps the overriding interest of politicians is to get power, political power, and keep political power, whether they are Democrats or Republicans. That's their agenda, and they have to somehow sell voters on a particular agenda. And most of what they sell voters is that elect me to office, and I'll use my office to get goodies for you.
Let me pose a thought to you, though. That here's a president who told us, and you mentioned in this article, to cheering and mesmerized crowds, we are going to fundamentally change America. We will change America. We will change the world. And he believes in that. And I mean, to the point of he doesn't really care if he loses in the elections or his party loses in the election. Whereas you have Republicans, I think, who don't have the same convictions about protecting America. So I guess the question I'm posing to you, here's a guy that sees the vision of America that he wants, and here's another group over here is not quite sure what America's supposed to look like anyway.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. But however, if you look at, I've always said, and maybe it's too much of an exaggeration, I've always quoted Governor Wallace's statement back in the 70s when he was saying that there's not a dime's worth of difference between Republicans and Democrats. And, well, it might be more than a dime, but both of them seek the use of office to further their agenda. You look at George Bush. The president before Obama. Well, look at the kind of things that he proposed. The No Child Left Behind Act. He proposed the Medicare, the prescription drug policy program. He had he even signed off on these got rid of these light bulbs that we've been using for decades, and so you say, well, both parties they want to exceed their constitutional authority, and the reason why they get away with this is that many Americans want them to do that.
Right.
That is, many Americans want President Obama to do exactly what he's doing. They want the Obamacare. They want the regulation of business. They want the higher minimum wage, and so he's just doing what a large percentage of Americans want.
So you look out and maybe expand the discussion a little further then and say, okay, and I was talking to somebody about this morning. You have a lot of Americans who elected the president the second time. When my one caller said, yeah, they were ignorant. I said, I don't know. I'm not sure. They see a different America maybe than many see who are, let's say, baby boomers or who are older than that, and they see a different America right now. So it seems to me that one of the biggest questions we have to answer in 2015 and beyond is this. What America do we want? And you have, a lot of people you call the Tea Party Americans against the establishment Americans who like the central government the way it is and that they're handing out goodies. So is that a question you see coming up this year and beyond? What America do we want?
Well, I think it's already settled issue. The kind of American that the kind of America that most Americans want, and I don't know whether they want the results of it because it means just national decline. But they want an America where the Washington D.C. or the Congress can reach into one American's pockets through the tax code and give them something. That's the American that they want. Now, however, they do not want the results of it. If they understood the results of it, that is the decline of a great nation. That is, we're like in the ninth inning, and we're 5 runs behind. And so you might ask the question, well, is it reversible? Well, of course it's reversible. But what is the probability of our reducing government to the level that is supposed to be within the Constitution? And frankly, I just don't see it. That is, and matter of fact, it pays for the average American to try to push their congressman or senator to get more and more, because if they don't push to get more and more, it just means that somebody else instead of them will be getting more and more.
By the way, how many outs are there in the ninth inning? If we're 5 down.
It could be 2 outs.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that really bothers me right now is we look at this disposable America that we have today. I was reading an article the other day by someone that says we have a generation of people who thinks that things will always work, and when they don't, we throw them away. And we look very short term. We don't seem to look long into the future. Thus, we don't see any changes in Social Security. We don't see changes in Medicare and other things that maybe would bode well for our kids and our grandkids in the future. So when we look at an America that seems to be this disposable America right now, I think it bodes ill, as you kind of said a moment ago, in changing the ship around and going the other way. People are saying, well, you know, it's not Miss Right, it's Miss Right now.
Well, you're absolutely right, and you know, I think one of the tragic things about this whole change in direction is that it was brought upon us by what some people call the greatest generation. That is, they say that generation of America that lived through the Depression and fought the Great World War II, and they're the great Americans. But if you look at the question, what did America look like in 1920 compared to the America that followed that in 1940, 1930, and thereafter? Well, we had a limited government, and it was this so-called greatest generation that brought us Social Security, that brought us many aspects of the welfare state, brought us giant government. That is when the greatest generation was born. Federal spending as percentage of the GDP was 3%. Today, federal spending as a percentage of the GDP is close to 30%. And so we had this generation of Americans that developed this big government, and nobody wants to step up. And any politician talking about stepping back from this humongous government, he'll be run out of town on rail by Americans.
We're talking with Dr. Walter E. Williams this morning here on the Gary Sutton Show. You know, how badly has the Constitution been hurt? Is it irreparable damage? And I read in your one article here, as I mentioned, in Obama versus Us, you said both parties are very guilty of abusing the Constitution, and I agree with you totally. But how badly has it been hurt? We keep on thinking we can do whatever we want to the supreme law of our land here, and it will always be resilient, but I'm starting to wonder.
Well, I think it's impossible to go back. I think that the kind of vision the framers had, they had a deep distrust for the United States Congress.
Right.
A deep, deep distrust. And you see this just by reading the parts of the Bill of Rights. It says, it's language in there that says, Congress shall not prohibit. Congress shall not infringe. Congress shall not disparage. That is, if you ask the question, well, why did the founders put that kind of language there if they did not believe Congress would do that?
Right.
And so I've suggested to people, I might have said it on the show before, that when we die, and if at our next destination we see anything like a Bill of Rights, we know that we are in hell. because a Bill of Rights in heaven would be an insult to God. It would be saying that we cannot trust God.
Yeah, it was amazing. They listed 17 different powers that they said, you can't do this.
Oh, that is absolutely right. And but however, the American people, they don't give a hoot about it.
Nope.
All they want is their color TV and their iPhones, and for politicians to talk nice.
You know, you wrote an article also on the 10th of December, What's Rule of Law? And I was really fascinated by the article because you laid it out in your normal way of doing common sense about baseball pitchers and so forth. But one of the things you said in that article, laws or rules in a free society should have similar characteristics. There should be rule of law. Rule of law means that laws are certain and known in advance. Laws envision no particular outcome except that of allowing people to peaceably pursue their own objectives. And finally, and most importantly, laws are equally applied to everyone, including government officials. No one could state it any plainer than that. I thought it was very well said.
Oh, that is right. But see, however, what many Americans want, they don't want rule by, as Latin would say, as the Latins would say, by legis. That means by legislatures, by law. They want rules by privileges. That is, they want laws to apply to certain people and not to apply to others. We see that, and we see that with the so-called affirmative action laws. That is, we want special laws for women and that don't apply to men, or special laws for minorities that don't apply to non-minorities. We want to exempt Congress from having to obey all the laws that we have to obey. That is, we would not allow if you owed money to the Bank of America, we would not allow the Bank of America go into your account and take your money. But however, if you owed money to the IRS, we do allow the IRS to come into your bank and take your money, except unless you're Al Sharpton. So no.
You know, it was interesting to watch when Obamacare was fashioned. It was the contortions that they went through to try to take care of one group differently than another group the whole way through. It reminded me of when they lay out different legislative boundaries when a certain group is won, and it goes around certain homes and make sure you get the right voters in there. I mean, when you get into that kind of lawmaking, it seems to me you have gone totally the opposite direction of what our founding fathers probably envisioned.
Oh, that's right. And speaking of the Obamacare, you see this guy, this Professor Gruber.
Yes.
He's saying that how dumb Americans are, and that we had to, to sneak it through so that it would not be seen as a tax. And the kind of remarkable thing, and nobody picked up on, and I wrote it in my column, is that Gruber felt comfortable saying these kind of things.
Right.
At the University of Pennsylvania, at Washington University, at other universities. He said it and at universities, these are the very places where you have academic elite that have contempt for the common man.
And fertile minds waiting to soak it up. You know, the one guy that understood it as a tax was Justice Roberts, though, because he said we can't have mandates, but we can't have a tax. So I'll take this and help President Obama out by calling it a tax. So that's one guy that understood it as a tax, right?
Yeah, he understood.
Unfortunately. Unfortunately. Dr. Williams, we're going to take a very quick break. When we come back, I want to ask you about an article you wrote on December 24th, Black Progression and Retrogression. That's been one of the stories in the country here to end out in the year. And want to get your thoughts on that article as well. Dr. Walter E. Williams back with us here on the Gary Sutton Show right after this on News Radio 910 WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show, WSBA. Dr. Walter E. Williams is with us here this morning. He serves on the faculty of Georgia Mason University as a John M. Olin Distinguished Professor of Economics, and we welcome him back to the show. I want to kind of combine your article you did on the 24th of December and maybe the one you wrote this morning, the liberals' use of black people, and the one on the 24th, Black Progression and Retrogression. You and I have talked before, and I thought you made some really good points about how black people saw this country in earlier days and thrived in this country in earlier days, and how black people see it today and maybe are not thriving today.
Well, I think that one of the starting points to recognize some of the problems that black Americans face, that
right.
A large percentage of black Americans, is to recognize that much of the pathology that we see in many black communities today is entirely new in black history. And I point out in the column just look at the households, and in the late 1800s, as early as the late 1800s, 70 to 80% of black households were two-parent households.
Right.
In New York City, 85% of black households were two-parent. And
that was in 1925, yeah.
In 1950, only 18% of black households were single parents. Now, however, today, it's only 30% of black kids live in two-parent families. And look at 1940, black illegitimacy was about 14%. Today, black illegitimacy is 75%. And I point out close to 50% of blacks never marry. So what one has to say, well, look, now, back in the 1880s, this was only a generation or two out of slavery, and blacks had far fewer opportunities in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. But we found that the black family was much better off. So you say, well, what happened since then? It surely slavery did not happen again, but we had the development of the welfare state, and the welfare state has done to black Americans what slavery could not have done, harsh Jim Crow laws and other forms of racial discrimination could not have done, is destroy the black family. And the significance of all this is that the poverty rate among black female-headed households is around 47%. But however, if you look at black families where there's a mother and father and children, the poverty rate is in the single digits and has been in the single digits for several decades. And so I think that it's significant to recognize that the major problems that black Americans have today is because of government, the welfare state, and that applies to the education system. That is, blacks were far better educated, had higher achievement standards back in the 50s before we had the opportunity of the day than we have today. And the average black kid, what most Americans do not realize, and particularly black Americans don't realize, is that the average black kid who graduates from high school, he has the reading, writing, computational, and scientific skills of a white 6th or 7th grader. And that is absolute tragedy, and it's absolute fraud. Just for one example of this, they were just talking about the Ferguson riots, in Ferguson.
Right.
They're saying, well, they don't have many black policemen. Nobody's asked the question, well, how many blacks took the civil service test and could not pass it?
Wow.
Because of the rotten education.
Yeah. You know, one of the ironies, and one of the things that jumped out at me, I guess, here in your article, you said from 1890 to 1950, the black labor force participation rates were higher than those of whites. And today you mentioned it's a mere fraction. But you also talk about some of the laws that had an effect on black Americans. Labor laws like the Davis-Bacon Act of 1931, which was a federal minimum wage law for construction workers, and then 1938, the federal minimum wage law for all workers reduced work opportunities for blacks. So here we are, and I say the irony, here we are talking again now about what? Let's get that minimum wage up there, and that'll somehow help people. Obviously, it did not help people then because the numbers certainly went backwards.
Well, that's right, and it prices the lowest skilled worker out of the market. That is, no employer is going to pay $15 an hour or $7 an hour to a person who's so unfortunate so as to only be able to produce $4 worth of value per hour. And so what that means is that person who has low skills, he doesn't have a chance to get a job in the first place and upgrade his skills through on-the-job training. And so, matter of fact, that's how most of us upgrade our skills and get higher wages, is through on-the-job training. I don't care whether you're an intern, a low-quality doctor, or whether you're a radio announcer. You start out low and you move up. Now, if someone says, well, look, in order for you to be a doctor, you have to be as good as a surgeon who's had 20 years of experience. Well, young interns wouldn't get a job. They'd be priced out of the market.
You wrote a piece today called Liberals' Use of Black People. It kind of slides over into that, segues over into that. You can only be used if you want to be used, can't you? And if you accept what someone is preaching. I often ask people who are black Americans, and I have good friends of mine, and said, why would you vote for President Obama? Well, he promises this. But we've seen a lot of promises over the years, and yet the situation has gotten worse, not better. And so you'd say, well, do I keep on going back to those people who keep on promising me this stuff?
Well, I can't give you an answer to explain that. That is 95% of blacks vote for Democrats. That is, black people have become a one-party people in a two-party system, and the Democrats can just ignore them or don't have to pay much attention.
Right.
And you note the significant difference in the treatment of by Democrats of Mexican Americans. That is, they will go down. They'll go to the wire. So with this immigration stuff and all kinds of favors from Mexican Americans, they know that the Republicans are after their vote. But they know with blacks, they can just ignore blacks and just, maybe throw them a few crumbs, because they know that blacks are always going to vote Democrat no matter what the Democrats do.
So the question is, what happens if they lose some of this vote, this 95% vote?
Well, that will be the end of liberals, because the liberals and Democrats, they need the black vote so that they can stay in office. Now, if 30% of blacks just decide not to vote at all or vote for Republicans, it would mean that the Democrats would lose a hell of a lot of seats at the federal, state, and local levels, and lose a lot of political power at the federal, state, and local levels.
You mean kind of like this last election a little bit?
Oh, that's absolutely right. And in cities like in Chicago or Detroit or other cities where if blacks chose to abandon the Democrat Party, the Democrat Party would be in deep doo-doo.
And finally, you mentioned there that the way you make sure that you keep them on your side is keep them in a perpetual state of grievance.
That's right. And that is to keep blacks concerned with the legacy of slavery, keep them with the concern that white people are out to discriminate against them, keep them concerned with that cops are out to murder them, even though I think a number of blacks killed by cops this year was under 200, but blacks killed by other blacks is 7,000, roughly 7,000. And so it said, so these people are chanting that black lives are worthwhile. They ought to be chanting not against police, but people, thugs in the community that prey on black people.
Well, we don't want to let the facts get in the way, though, right?
That is absolutely right.
Dr. Williams, I hope we have a much better year than 2014. I'll look forward to talking to you again in the new year, and I wish you a very happy new year.
Okay, and happy new year to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams. Take care.